Hi, welcome to Simple Shifts, Conversations to Fuel Your Body, Mind, and Soul. I'm Martha McKinnon from the blog website, Simple Nourished Living, and this is my brother and partner, Peter Morrison.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing good. Another beautiful day in Southern California. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. So today our topic is going to be component meal prep or ingredient meal prep as opposed to more traditional meal prep. But before we dive into that, what's exciting in your world?
I'm happy to report we are on podcast number 19.
Okay, so we haven't quit yet. We're hanging in there. We're continuing to
Chip away.
chip away, explore, learn, find our rhythm, and it's fun. I think it's fun because I think this is just it's a nice adjunct, I think, to what we do on the website, where we provide a lot of recipes, that are low calorie, that are easy, healthy, Weight Watchers friendly, and we get a lot of questions. We put out we put out emails several times a week, where I also try to provide, food for thought and encouragement and inspiration beyond just food. And now this is just another avenue, another way to sort of take a different look at some of those aspects that, are kind of integral to the whole journey, the whole weight loss, weight management, healthy eating, healthy living journey. So I'm finding it fun. Are you?
I am.
Good.
It's different.
Good.
Yeah, having a conversation versus just writing about something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know about you, but I've had through the years, if I think back on my life, I've had like insights through conversation
Mm-hmm.
with people,
Mm-hmm.
things that got through in a way that they didn't, through other forms, other media.
Or
So
you'll hear something that will maybe not even in the moment maybe mean anything, but a day or two later,
right,
something will cause you to think differently or something. So
yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. The more you think about thinking, and
hmm
change and behavior and how it all works. And so you're right. I mean, so sometimes you'll hear something and maybe it doesn't even register like you're saying until a day or two later, where you suddenly reprocess it and you see something in a new light. And that's happened many times for me, in ways that have been just so helpful and really life changing. I think it's interesting to realize that you can be going along forever and ever and ever and just get a new insight, a new thought, and everything everything after that shifts. When you get just this slightly different way of seeing something.
hmm
So I think that's it's cool because I'm continuing to learn. I mean, another fundamental, I think, belief that I have is that we kind of share, and I like sharing and talking about things that I'm learning, but also things that I feel like I need to know. And I think the more you talk about it, the more you learn and discover, the more progress you make on your journey. So that's pretty cool. So thank you for these
yeah,
conversations.
it's good. I'm glad we took the plunge and decided to
Right,
go.
exactly. And we didn't wait till we were ready. That was a new insight that I had recently. I'm reading voraciously right now. And one concept that really just sort of shook me was this whole concept of someday is just really, that's just a thought, that's just a concept. Often we'll tell ourselves, I'll do that someday. And it's like, you're only ever going to do anything in the now, in the moment.
Hmm.
Someday just, it's either now or it's
Do
never,
you think that's
really.
just
So
an
just
excuse we tell ourselves?
I don't even think it's an excuse. I sometimes don't even think we think about it. I think we sometimes we just say, well, someday I'll get to that. And I think we use excuses that we don't have time, we don't have money, we don't have an, I know I do, that I'm not experienced enough. When I get my next degree, when I take my next course, I think I do a lot of comparison about, and I see a world of very, very smart, capable, talented people. And I think there's real danger in, comparing yourself and saying, well, and so I think I've done that a lot to myself, when I'm when I'm feeling at, like I'm an expert or that I have
Hmm.
something that's really valuable to say. And I think that that's the danger to you're always putting it out there because there's one more course, there's one more book, there's one more experience before you feel, ready. But if you flip it and say, well, maybe I'm one step ahead on my journey of somebody else, or and maybe I have one little insight to share.
Mm.
I don't have to know everything. Maybe I just have to know one thing that could be helpful, and to let yourself off the hook and say, I'll just share the one thing that I've learned. And if that helps somebody else, that's a good thing. So I think that that's been huge for me, just to have that awareness, to sort of take myself, give myself permission to be, to do the best I can and let that be good enough.
So was that hard for you when
So,
we decided to start this?
um, no, no, because I think that I've already started to have these awarenesses. I mean,
Mm.
I think there have been some huge shifts for me based on some reading I've been doing and some principles and philosophy that I've discovered within this past year. And so when you offered it up, I think I was just in that perfect space, to say, okay, let's try it. I think the Martha of a few years ago would have been like, wait, there's one more, right?
Not
I've done that
ready,
to
not
myself. There's one
ready.
more
Yeah.
course, there's one more course, there's one more certification, there's one more, you know, but I think I'm in a really different space based on these new insights and understanding.
Mm.
So,
Hmm.
so I think the timing was right.
Excellent.
Cool. So, we're going to talk about component cooking today, or component meal prep, because meal prep is something that comes up a lot when you're trying to eat better, when you're trying to lose weight. Planning and prepping can be really, really important. Would you agree with that? That like having a plan, doing some pre work, if you just leave it to like the last minute till when you're hungry without a plan, we're going to default to what's easy, right? And in our world, what's easy tends to be running out to the restaurant, right? Grabbing takeout, driving, doing, stopping at the drive through. So that, planning ahead, doing a little prep, I think is really important. It's been really important for me to do that pre planning. Because when you, like I said, when you wait till you're hungry, it's game
Right. Well,
over.
any
Um,
nutrition book or diet book, they always, I mean, they have their protocols and their process, but usually you're cleaning out your cupboards, you're grocery shopping, you're sort of planning and prepping for whatever. Um,
right.
yeah.
Right. So that, but I think that has to be balanced with real life, right? And a
Sure.
gradual approach, because I do believe that it's slow, small changes based on my decades of, experience, that it's really the realistic approach. So I'm always looking for ways to make things easier, more realistic. And there's no one way
Right.
either. So I like to offer up lots of different ways so that, we can find something that resonates with
Yep.
the widest
No, no, I
range
just
of
meant
folks
the
possible.
planning, the prepping part of it. Like,
Yeah, for sure. I think it's critical. I think anybody will tell you when you're wanting to change, you got to do some planning and prepping.
mhm.
You got to be doing some pre-thinking for sure. And so a lot of the approaches, so there's lots of different ways you can approach meal planning, meal prepping. And we've been providing meal plans, weekly sort of Weight Watchers friendly meal plans now for several years. And so we have a huge archive out there, which I would say take the more traditional approach where you think ahead to the meals that you want to make, you do your grocery shopping, and maybe you do a little prepping ahead. And that would be, I would say, a more traditional approach to meal planning. And then I would say the meal prepping, often what you'll see put forth is making some type of meal and then separating it out into individual containers. So, for example, you might make, a healthy stir fry and, cook it up and then put it in the individual containers. And then you've got your week's worth of meals for lunch and or dinner. So that's a very traditional approach to meal prep that works for a lot of people. So you cook, once or twice, portion everything out, and then you're ready to go. You can just, warm up your meals. And that works well for a lot of people. But for some people, if you don't like leftovers, if you like variety, if you want to be mixing things up, then that sounds very boring to a lot of people. And I know a lot of people who just say I don't like leftovers. And so there's an alternate approach that I think really reflects where I've come in my life right now, which I do more often. And I would call it sort of component meal prep or ingredient meal prep, where you prep individual ingredients that you can then use to mix and match to make a variety of different meals. So, for example, and sometimes I think I kind of use a sort of a hybrid of both of these, so that I might make a soup, for example, and that would be more traditional. And then I might make some components. So I might use my rice cooker to cook off quinoa or rice, and I'd have that in the fridge. And then I might take a tray, sheet pan, and roast a bunch of vegetables, and have that all cooked. I might then grab a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store, or cook a rotisserie chicken in the air fryer. And what I typically tend to do is then like debone the chicken right away, just because I feel like it's easier to debone it when it's warm, and then put all of the chicken meat in the fridge. And then maybe if I'm really ambitious, get some of your salad veg pre-washed, pre-chopped, and in containers in the fridge. And when you do that, now you've got all of these foods that you can mix and match in a variety of ways with different sauces, with different garnishes, to really mix things up, and you can get a meal put together really quickly. So is that something that you've ever tried, or does that resonate with you, that whole just cook up some ingredients and then put them together in various ways approach?
I've never I've never done it that way. The closest I've come is, and I think we've touched on this in previous podcasts, but if I was gonna make a soup or a stir fry, sometimes I would do it very lightly spiced, or like no spice,
Uh-huh.
just maybe salt and pepper, so that future iterations or leftovers could be easily varied with different spices and different sauces. So that's probably the
Mm-hmm.
closest I've come to, but I haven't prepared a bunch of different components ahead of time. Yeah.
And sometimes it could be just as much as like having a little bit of. I was thinking about this and talking with Brenda, and I think this kind of component approach, or never really starting from scratch, was the way that, if we looked back at how our grandmothers and great grandmothers cooked, I think there was that kind of approach to cooking, where like there would be like a big Sunday meal with a big hunk of meat, and all these various sides, from which there would be leftovers, where the leftovers from that roast could then be, with some of the leftover vegetables, could be turned into another meal, or maybe you add a salad in. So there was always, like, you were always starting, you weren't starting from scratch every night.
Mm.
You were always kind of starting with you know some leftovers on which you could then build your meals, which I think makes cooking and the whole process of getting dinner on the table every night a lot easier if you've got some things to start with. So, like, for example, with what I described, I mean, and I will often do that. And so then you're just, at dinner time, maybe you turn some of the chicken into a, chicken salad, and put it in lettuce wraps, or make a sandwich, or make a wrap out of it. Maybe you take some of the chicken. I have a recipe that I love that's really, really simple, where you take chicken broth, salsa, chopped up rotisserie chicken, and white beans, and you stir that together, and you let that bubble up, for 10 or 15 minutes, and it's a very nice soup. You could take, and the bowls have become really big. We eat a lot in bowls. So, I mean, you take your grain and your vegetables and your chicken, and then there's so many different sauces now that, you can, drizzle it with barbecue sauce or some type of tahini sauce or a peanut sauce, and you can take it in an Asian direction, or, you know, add some marinara and take it in an Italian direction, and suddenly you just have lots of different flavors, and so you're eating the same meat things, but you're mixing them and matching them in ways that just don't feel as boring. You don't really feel like you're eating the same thing every night. So that can just be so I just wanted to offer this up as an alternative to like the more traditional approach. So maybe you play with some type of hybrid approach to this in terms of, and this really sort of plays into our last podcast episode where we're talking about girl dinner. If you have all these foods in the fridge, you can just sort of mix them, match them, put them on a plate, maybe add a dip, and suddenly dinner just becomes, especially if you're cooking for yourself, which a lot of our readers are. There are a lot of readers who are they live alone, or they're families of one or two, and this can just be just a new way of thinking about feeding yourself. That's just, I think, more conducive to when you're cooking for one or two.
Well, it seems like it potentially could result in less waste.
Yeah.
Because I know sometimes you buy all these ingredients to make a certain meal or something, and it's like, well, now what am I going to do with, 3/4 of
Yeah.
something that you had left over? There, you only needed a little bit of. So,
That's a good awareness. You're right, because especially, I mean, I really found that the traditional meal planning approach for me never worked, because I've only ever been a family of one or two. I've never had a big family, and so often you do a lot of planning, like you're saying, you do a lot of shopping with this intention that you're going to cook 3 or 4 or 5 times in the week, and then life gets in the way. The recipe makes more than you realize, and so you have a lot more left over that you end up reusing. Somebody invites you out to dinner, and suddenly you have all these ingredients that don't get used in a timely manner, and you end up wasting a lot of ingredients. So you're right. I mean, I have found that that's something that I notice about my refrigerator. It seems like when I compare my refrigerator to other people's refrigerators, it doesn't really seem like, it's not as stuffed. It doesn't seem as though there's as much in it, but it's food that can be readily used and mixed and matched. So it seems like whenever I open the fridge, there's always something to eat, even though there's free space in there too. There's always food that I always open it up and say, oh, I can mix this and this and have a nice lunch. So you're right. I mean, the waste is a good point, that it does, I believe, lead to less waste as well.
very good. I don't have any other.
Does it make sense? Is it something you think you might try? You have a pretty, I think when we've talked about the way that your approach to eating, I mean, you've created a really nice approach, I think, in that you have certain foods that are sort of traditions that you make on certain days of the week, right? I mean, you pretty much like you grill salmon pretty much every Sunday. Is that right? That's kind of cool, right? And then do you always eat it in the same exact way, or do you have different sides with it?
It sometimes varies by season, but it's usually with a salad.
Yeah.
Sometimes
So,
it's a homemade salad. Sometimes it's a bagged salad that you just sort of
mm-hmm.
add something to. And sometimes if you're kind of tired of salad, I will air fry some vegetables, broccoli,
Mm-hmm.
cauliflower, carrots, just to sort of change things up. Sometimes, no,
Yeah.
sometimes there's sweet potatoes involved. Sometimes there's quinoa. So no, it does vary.
So it's kind of neat, though. I think that, again, it's a great approach to simplification. I think another great approach to meal planning, meal prep, if you just start to think, because I think we lose a lot of time, I do, with just thinking about what to do instead of just, knowing what you're going to do. I think knowing what you're going to do is like 90% of the battle. So if you know that Sunday is salmon, and maybe Monday is meatless, and Tuesday is tacos, and Wednesday is pasta,
Mm-hmm.
and Thursday is leftovers, I think life gets a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because I think there's a lot of time we lose in trying to me anyway, I think too much. So overthinking, over trying to decide, it's like the similar phenomenon as people who've just come up with their sort of uniform for work, right? The whole Steve Jobs jeans, sneakers,
Black
black
turtleneck.
turtleneck approach, where it's like if when you have lots of decisions to make in your life, you want to figure out ways to minimize decisions in other areas of your life, just to make life nicer. And um and I think that's another thing we can do for ourselves in the world of food, especially, is just figure it out, come up with a routine that works, come up with a plan, and we take just a lot of pressure off ourselves, and it becomes easy. um, I think this plays a lot into the whole concept of habits and behavior change. And if you can find new ways to be and new ways to make things easier, then you're just going to be more successful. you know
And I love those days when the meal is already, you sort of know what you're having. You might not know
right.
100%. So, and it just gives you so much more time and more mental, more
Mental space,
space. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think we're suffering a lot from just, well, overload, right? Overload in so many different ways, but like overload in just decisions that need to be made, right? And like you're saying, once the decisions, like, we lose so much time in the process of trying to decide,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where if we can just, especially with decisions that are, they're not life threatening, like what we're going to have for dinner. If we can just start figuring that out and figuring out a system to make us decision, you're right. It just frees up this tremendous amount of mental space that you have for other things. It's fascinating.
I think,
And I think maybe that's why,
oh, go ahead.
you know, I think that's why this approach really works.
Mm-hmm.
It works because if you've got a bunch of food in the fridge, you can just figure out some way to put it together. Or if salmon is on Sundays and you're going to do pasta on Wednesdays, I mean, your life just gets easier.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be exactly the same, you could easily change it up. And if you're someone like me, the whole paradox of choice, which was a
Mm-hmm.
really good book, I'm after reading that book, I'm a maximizer. It's like if there's something to research and 20 variations to sort of filter through in your brain, I'm gonna go through all of them before I decide. And that's just, oh my goodness, it just takes way too much time and energy. And
I think that phenomenon exists in the diet world, quite honestly, because there are so many different approaches,
mm,
right, to weight management. And I think a lot of people just spend their whole lives trying to decide and which approach to take. And I've even seen that when people walk into Weight Watchers for the first time. I need to lose some weight, but I'm confused. Do I do low carb? Do I do Mediterranean? Do I do vegetarian? And so you can just lose your life, right, assessing, trying to maximize which approach is the best approach, and never actually take a step
mm-hmm,
towards changing.
mm-hmm.
And I think it's a real phenomenon in our world just because of like information overload. So yeah, so when we recognize that about ourselves, like whatever we can do to make life easier and better for ourselves, to minimize our decisions, is, it's a kind thing to do for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like the
All
idea of
right.
component building meals out of components, and
Yeah,
hope,
and I hope this resonates with others. I mean, we'd love to, again, get your, for the people who are tuning into this, to get your comments and your thoughts if you have an approach to meal planning and or meal prepping that you've found works for you. And I think, like any of this, you just got to keep trying, trying different approaches till you find what works for you. And if you try something for a while and it's not working, know that there's lots of alternatives and there's lots of different ways to get to your destination. You just got to keep trying, keep plugging along, plodding along, and then you'll find what resonates with you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
All right. We're going to sign off here and be back again soon. Have a good one.
Have a good one, everyone. Take care.